Why did no one speak up when they saw it happen? That question would haunt the drop zone for years after. But in that moment, inside the deafening belly of a C-130 slicing through the California sky, silence was its own kind of complicity. The engines roared like a storm trapped in a metal box. The air reeked of hydraulic oil and adrenaline. 20 candidates sat shoulder to shoulder, each built like the statues of a forgotten war, faces taut, hands trembling, pretending they were. And at the center of it all stood the one person who didn't seem to belong. A woman. Compact, calm, lean muscle wrapped in the heavy fabric of a halo suit. Her name was Master Chief Anna Sharma. To most of the men staring at her, she wasn't a Master Chief. She was just the experiment, the woman sent to prove a political point. That's what they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. But she always heard, she just never cared. Her fingers moved across her rig like a surgeon over a patient, measured, precise, emotionless. Every strap checked twice, every buckle tugged, every handle memorized. While the others adjusted for comfort, she adjusted for survival. At the front of the cabin, Senior Chief Rick Rhino Jensen paced like a warden inspecting his inmates. His voice boomed over the engines, hoarse, proud, full of that particular breed of confidence that only comes from never having been truly tested. "Look, I'm not saying women can't serve," he shouted, smirking at the line of nervous faces. "I'm just saying this," he pointed toward Sharma, "ain't the place for her." A ripple of laughter broke the tension, small and guilty. Sharma didn't move, didn't flinch. Her focus never wavered. Rhino noticed. He wanted her to react, that was the point. So he pushed closer, his boots clanging against the deck. "Think you can handle a little wind, sweetheart?" The word dropped heavy in the space between them. "Sweetheart." Her eyes lifted just once, pale and calm as winter light. "I'll manage, Senior Chief," she said quietly. Not angry, not defensive, just certain. She turned back to her gear, and that, more than anything, infuriated him, because it wasn't defiance, it was dismissal. At the back, near the ladder to the cockpit, a man watched through half-lidded eyes. Captain Elias Thorne, commanding officer, 30 years in uniform. He'd seen hundreds of young operators try to prove themselves through noise and muscle, but what he saw in Anna Sharma was something else entirely: stillness, control. That kind of calm only came from experience bought with blood. A flicker of memory surfaced in his mind, an old classified report from a forgotten mountain range, a name he'd read once that never left him. He couldn't place it yet, but the feeling was there. Recognition. 10 minutes to drop. The warning bell clanged. The massive ramp at the rear of the plane began to lower, revealing a wash of desert sunlight that cut through the fuselage like a blade. The wind hit them, thin, brutal, sharp enough to taste. One by one, Rhino checked each jumper, yanking straps, barking corrections with unnecessary force. It was theater, dominance disguised as instruction. When he reached Sharma, his tone softened, but his hands didn't. "Let me help you with that," he grunted, fingers brushing the pilot's chute handle on her pack. A deliberate move, a sleight of hand. For a split second, his thumb pressed against a retaining pin it had no business touching. Then, quick as a magician's trick, he gave her shoulder strap an exaggerated tug. "There," he said, "all set, wouldn't want you to have any trouble up there." He smiled. Predator's grin. Captain Thorne's eyes narrowed. From his angle he caught the tiny, almost imperceptible twist of Rhino's wrist. A movement that didn't belong. He didn't interrupt, yet, but his pulse slowed to a dangerous calm. Sharma didn't react. She didn't need to, she felt it. The weight distribution shift, faint, wrong, like a whisper off-key. Most jumpers would never notice. She did. Her instincts screamed to stop the jump, to check the rig. But experience told her something else. Register it, file it, trust the procedures. Don't give him the satisfaction of seeing doubt. Because when you've lived through worse than gravity, you stop fearing the fall. Green light. The jump master's voice tore through the cabin. The line of candidates surged forward, one by one disappearing into the sky. Their bodies vanished into blue nothingness, tiny silhouettes swallowed by wind. Rhino turned before leaping, flashing a smirk that didn't quite hide his unease. Then he was gone too. And finally, there was only her. Anna stood alone at the ramp. The horizon spread out beneath her, 1,000 miles of sunburnt desert and shimmering heat. The wind roared through her helmet. She inhaled once, steady, centering. Then she stepped into nothing. The world dissolved into motion. Her body sliced through the air, controlled chaos, elegant as it was violent. The sound was overwhelming, a hurricane against her face. Her altimeter beeped faintly at her wrist. 30,000 feet. 25. 20. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic. Her mind, a machine running through numbers, drift vectors, descent rates. At 10,000 feet, her hand moved. She found the ripcord and pulled. The pack jolted. She waited for the bloom of fabric, the sudden pull of life. But nothing came. A soft thud, then silence. The pilot's chute streamed behind her like a dying flag, tangled, limp, useless. Her training took over instantly. No panic, no scream. Malfunction, cut away, execute procedure. Her right hand shot to the red handle at her hip. One pull, one sharp motion. Main chute gone, severed clean. Now she was falling again. Clean, fast, alone. She went for the reserve, left hand pull. A flash of white fabric burst, then twisted, caught in her own wake. A snarl of nylon and cords. Dead. 2 failures. Statistical impossibility. Unless someone had meant it that way. On the ground they saw it. The dots of parachutes against the desert sky, and one that wasn't a dot at all, just a streak falling too fast. Jumper in distress. Radios flared, medics scrambled. No one thought rescue, they thought recovery. But Anna Sharma wasn't falling. She was flying. Her body flattened, arms and legs stretched wide, fingers slicing air. Every cell in her body remembered what thousands of hours in wind tunnels had taught her. Air isn't empty. It's a surface, if you know how to ride it. She adjusted angle, pitch, drag, found lift in the chaos. The world stopped being a blur, it became data. Altitude, wind shear, terrain. She wasn't looking for safety. She was looking for the right kind of danger. And there, on the far western edge of the drop zone, she saw it. A sand dune, steep, 30 degrees. Soft enough to bleed momentum, long enough to survive. A 1 in a million chance. But that was still better than none. From below, the trainees watched, frozen in disbelief. She's steering, she's gliding, one whispered. Captain Thorne's binoculars tracked the dark shape cutting across the sunlight. His voice dropped to a reverent whisper. She's not crashing, he said. She's landing. The dune loomed large now, the wind screaming past her ears. She shifted posture, feet forward, chin tucked, every muscle bracing for a collision that would either kill her or prove she was something else entirely. Impact. A thunderclap of sand exploded upward. Her legs took the first brutal hit. Then she rolled, instinctively, body folding and twisting through the momentum. A parachute landing fall executed at a speed no one was meant to survive. She tumbled up the dune, carving a scar into the earth, a cloud of dust swallowing her whole. Then silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Medics slammed brakes, no one moved. And from that swirling haze of sand, a figure rose. Slowly, painfully, but upright. Anna Sharma stood, a silhouette cut from sunlight and grit. She brushed sand from her sleeve with mechanical precision. Blood trickled from her cheek. Her breathing was shallow. But she was alive. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "No way." Another, "She landed it." Rhino's mouth hung open. The color drained from his face. The arrogance that once filled the man evaporated, leaving only terror. He hadn't seen a woman survive. He'd seen something he couldn't explain. Captain Thorne lowered his binoculars, the muscles in his jaw tightening. His voice came out calm, deadly calm. "Senior Chief Jensen," he said into his radio, "my office, now." It wasn't a command, it was a verdict. As the medics raced toward her, Anna waved them off. "No stretcher," she said, "I'm fine." She was, but fine wasn't about comfort, it was about control. Even bruised, she radiated something few people ever learn to project: absolute command of herself. And as she looked up toward the sky she'd just fallen from, the only thought in her mind was a quiet one. "You tried to break me. All you did was remind me what I'm made of." Why did he do it? That was the question circling through Captain Elias Thorne's mind as the desert heat rippled across the tarmac. He walked toward the command post with the slow, deliberate steps of a man holding back a storm, every movement precise, every thought sharpened to a razor's edge. Around him, the base had gone eerily quiet. Even the wind seemed to have chosen silence over risk. Inside the medical tent, Master Chief Anna Sharma sat on the edge of a folding cot. Her face was a study in stillness, pale under streaks of grit, a bruise blooming along her jaw. A medic hovered nearby, stammering about concussion checks and vitals, but she waved him off. Her voice was calm, clipped, professional. "I said I'm fine, Corpsman." She wasn't angry, she wasn't emotional. But her stillness felt heavier than rage ever could. Outside, trainees whispered to one another, their voices small and uncertain. They'd seen something that didn't fit in their world, something that shouldn't have been possible. They were trained to calculate risk, to measure probabilities. But what they just witnessed had no precedent. A fall that should have ended in death had turned into a landing that would be talked about for generations. And yet, Anna looked almost disappointed. She sat with her back straight, her gloved hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on nothing. Inside her head, the replay wouldn't stop. The soft thud of the pack, the streamer of useless nylon, the weight shift she'd felt just before the jump. She knew what had happened. She just didn't know why. Across the compound, Senior Chief Rick Jensen sat alone in the waiting room outside Thorne's office. His uniform was immaculate, but his hands betrayed him. They twitched, restless, fingers tapping against his knee like a Morse code of fear. He hadn't meant to kill her. That's what he told himself over and over, just a scare, a lesson, a reminder that this was a man's world, that the gates were guarded by people like him. But even that lie was unraveling now. Because deep down he knew exactly what he'd done. The door opened. "Senior Chief," Thorne said, his tone clipped and surgical. "Inside." Jensen stood, tried to straighten his spine, but the weight of his own cowardice pressed it back down. The office was cold. Air conditioning hummed softly, almost mocking the desert outside. Thorne sat behind a steel desk, a monitor glowing faint blue light across his face. For a long time he didn't speak. He just typed, steady, deliberate keystrokes. Each one sounded like the click of a hammer being drawn back. Finally he stopped. "Do you have any idea who you just tried to kill, Senior Chief?" Jensen swallowed. "Sir, I don't." Thorne's voice was soft, dangerous. "Just listen." He turned the monitor toward him. A personnel file filled the screen, classified header, clearance level, top secret. He began to read. Name: Sharma Anna. Rank: Master Chief Petty Officer. Current billet: Special Assignment, Naval Special Warfare Command. Jensen blinked. The words didn't make sense. He thought she was a candidate, a guest instructor, not that. Thorne continued, voice level. Previous unit: Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DVGRU. The words hung heavy. DVGRU, the unit that didn't officially exist, the kind of place where ghosts were trained to walk in daylight. She's been attached to special access missions for over a decade, Thorne said. 12 combat deployments, over 5,000 combat flight hours, and here's the part you should find familiar. He scrolled. The screen cast blue light over Jensen's pale, sweating face. Specialization, advanced free-fall operations, high-altitude infiltration and exfiltration, covert recovery, Halo and HAHO instructor. The best we've ever had. Thorne leaned back, folding his hands. His gaze didn't waver. She wasn't here to qualify. She was here to evaluate you. Curriculum assessment. This entire exercise was part of a review. You just sabotaged the rig of the woman sent here to improve your program. Silence. Outside, the muted sound of the bass loudspeakers called another round of drills. But in that office, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Jensen's jaw trembled. His hands gripped his knees until the knuckles went white. I didn't mean to. Yes, Thorne interrupted, you did. He stood now, slow, deliberate. The chair's metal legs screeched against the floor. You meant to humiliate her. You meant to make her fail. You thought you were protecting a tradition that doesn't need protecting. Thorne's voice deepened. But what you actually did was remind everyone why she exists, why people like her are necessary. He walked around the desk until he was standing directly over him. When a woman can survive the sabotage of a man who thinks he's untouchable, it's not just survival, Jensen. It's indictment. Jensen couldn't breathe. Sweat rolled down his temple. Thorne turned back toward the terminal, scrolling again. His tone softened, but not with mercy, with something colder. Her call sign, he said quietly, is Dijai. It means ghost, Hindi origin. For a decade she was the ghost of Kunar, the operator who went where no one else would. He stopped reading, looked up. The landing you just saw, that's not luck. That's a technique she invented after her C-130 was shot down over the Hindu Kush. She didn't just survive it. She perfected it. The room stayed silent. Only the hum of electricity filled the space between them. Finally, Thorne exhaled, slow and deliberate. You didn't try to test a candidate, senior chief. You tried to kill a legend. Two master-at-arms appeared at the doorway, silent and expressionless. Thorne didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Senior Chief Rick Jensen, he said. You are relieved of all duties, effective immediately. You'll be confined to the brig pending NCIS investigation for attempted murder, sabotage, and conduct unbecoming of a U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer. Jensen didn't fight, couldn't. His body had already surrendered. As they cuffed his wrists, he muttered something incoherent, a plea, a confession, maybe both. But no one answered. Outside, sunlight hit him like punishment. The trainees looked on, silent, watchful. They didn't laugh now. The man who had mocked them all was being walked across the tarmac in chains. At the far end of the field, Anna Sharma stood alone beside her ruined chute, recording the evidence with a handheld camera. She didn't look up as Jensen passed. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any accusation. That night the base was quiet again. The desert cooled into a calm darkness broken only by the wind whispering across sand. Inside his quarters, Captain Thorne sat at his desk, staring at the after-action report on his screen. His hand hovered over the keyboard, but for once, words didn't come easy. He'd been in command long enough to see the best and worst of people. He'd seen courage turn into arrogance, discipline rot into cruelty. But this was different. It wasn't just about a failed jump. It was about a system that had quietly, efficiently failed her. He thought about the way she had stood there after landing, dust-covered, bruised, unbroken. Not angry, not triumphant, just resolute. He realized that what she'd done that day was more than survival. It was reclamation. She had taken a moment designed to destroy her, and turned it into proof that she could not be destroyed. Thorn closed the report and stood. His reflection in the dark window looked older than it had that morning. He whispered to himself, "We've been teaching them the wrong things." He knew what had to happen next. The following morning, the desert sun climbed over the horizon, washing the base in blinding gold. Formation bells rang. The trainees assembled in neat rows, the same young men who had once snickered in the plain. They stood straighter now, quieter. Captain Thorn walked across the sand toward them. His boots left deliberate prints. Behind him, the medics, instructors, and even the senior staff followed, drawn not by protocol but by something heavier. At the center of the field stood Anna Sharma. She had refused medical leave. Her uniform was clean, though her cheek still bore the purple mark of impact. She faced the sunrise unmoved. Thorn stopped 3 feet away. And then, before anyone could comprehend what they were seeing, he came to attention and rendered a salute. Not a perfunctory one, not ceremony. It was slow, deliberate. An act of respect. An apology. The air shifted, no one spoke. Anna returned the salute, crisp and precise. Her face unreadable. "Captain," she said simply. He lowered his hand. His voice carried over the sand, quiet but sharp enough to slice through the still air. "Every one of you," he said, turning toward the formation, "take a good look." They obeyed. Some with awe. Some with shame. You just witnessed what this institution claims to stand for, but rarely practices. Discipline, mastery, integrity under fire. What you saw wasn't luck, it was competence. He took a breath, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the young men who only yesterday had laughed. Let this be the first and most important lesson you learn here. Assumptions are a cancer. Arrogance will get you killed. Or worse, it'll get your teammates killed. He turned toward Anna again. His tone softened, almost reverent. "Today you saw the best. Don't ever forget it." He dismissed them with a single nod. No further speeches, no applause. As the trainees dispersed, one by one they passed her. Each paused just for a heartbeat, to offer a nod, a quiet "ma'am," a small salute. The tide had shifted. Something fundamental had changed. Not through orders, not through punishment. Through example. And as the crowd thinned, Thorn looked back once more at the woman standing alone in the morning light. There was no triumph in her expression, no pride. Just purpose. Because for Anna Sharma, survival wasn't the victory. Living by the standard, that was. The world had seen her fall. Now it would learn what it meant that she stood back up. What does silence sound like after a miracle? On most bases, it's the hum of generators, the shuffle of boots, the static of distant radios. But that night at Edward's drop command, it was something different. It was reverence. The kind of silence that settles only after people witness something their minds can't explain. No one slept, not really. They replayed the moment over and over in their heads, the plummet, the impossible control, the landing. The story changed slightly with each retelling, but one thing never did: she walked away. By dawn, whispers had already become a legend. They said she didn't panic. They said she turned her fall into flight. They said she stood up after hitting the ground at 120 miles an hour. And all of it, every single version, still sounded like an understatement. In the early light, Master Chief Anna Sharma stood outside the equipment hangar, her chute draped across a metal table. It was no longer a piece of gear. It was evidence. Her hands moved methodically, untangling lines, inspecting the damage thread by thread. She didn't rush, didn't speak. Her expression didn't change. Every movement was quiet, deliberate, the behavior of someone whose emotions never leaked where they didn't belong. But inside, beneath the calm, something stirred. Not anger, not vengeance. Recognition. She'd seen this kind of sabotage before. Not here, not in training, but in places where survival wasn't symbolic, where malice came wrapped in a uniform. And she remembered what her old mentor once told her in a freezing Afghan outpost, as they packed for a night drop. "Trust your gear, Sharma," he'd said, "but trust yourself more." The words returned now, like a ghost she hadn't invited. She straightened a torn strap, running her thumb along the stitching. There, the faint indentation where the pin had been tampered with, subtle, surgical. She photographed it from 3 angles, logged it in her notebook. Procedure, always procedure. From across the hangar, Captain Thorne watched. He'd been standing there for 5 minutes without announcing himself. She hadn't acknowledged him, but he knew she was aware he was there. She always knew. He finally stepped closer, boots echoing against the concrete. "You should be resting, Master Chief," he said quietly. She didn't look up. Rest doesn't fix this. Thorne studied her for a moment, taking in the bruise on her jaw, the precise way she handled the damaged rig, as though it were both weapon and wound. "You logged it." "Every stitch," she replied, "including the tampering." He nodded, but his expression was grim. "NCIS is en route. I've already filed the preliminary report. Jensen's in custody." Her hands paused mid-motion, just for a heartbeat. Then she resumed working. "He'll talk." Thorne's jaw tightened. "He'll try not to." Silence again, the sound of wind against the hangar doors. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold and clear. "You know what's worse than what he did, Captain?" He frowned. "What?" He thought he'd get away with it. There was no anger in her tone, just a quiet fact that cut deeper than rage. Thorne said nothing. He just watched her resume her inspection, her composure unbreakable, her hands steady as machines. For a moment he saw something rare, not the operator, not the legend, but the person. Someone carrying weight so heavy that even gravity felt redundant. By mid-morning, the investigators arrived, 2 NCIS agents in plain clothes, all clipped tones and recording devices. They took statements, collected evidence, asked sterile questions. Jensen's quarters were sealed, his locker stripped, his personal gear catalogued. They found traces of fiber on his gloves, a bent retaining pin hidden in his tool kit, and a half-burned notebook with scribbled notes about testing her resolve. It was enough, more than enough. Jensen didn't resist questioning. He didn't have the energy for denial. He sat across from the agents, head low, hands trembling. "I didn't mean to kill her," he muttered again and again, as if repetition could turn a lie into truth. But the agents didn't need his confession. The evidence spoke louder than guilt. Captain Thorne stood outside the interrogation room, arms crossed, listening through the glass. He'd seen plenty of men break under pressure. Jensen didn't break, he collapsed. Inside the medical bay, Anna was undergoing her second evaluation. The medic's flashlight danced across her pupils. "No concussion," he said, "just bruising, and I don't even know how your spine's intact." "I do," she replied softly. "Physics." He stared at her. "Physics." "The sand dune," she explained. 30-degree incline, absorbed vertical energy into horizontal motion. The trick is angling the roll before impact. The medic shook his head in disbelief. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said, standing, "but it's repeatable." That was how her mind worked, not survival but analysis, not miracle but method. By the afternoon, the sun baked the desert in waves of gold. The base carried on, though quieter, more subdued. Trainees who once joked behind her back now stole glances of respect or shame as she passed. And she felt every one of them, not as validation but as responsibility. That's the thing about competence. When you show people what's possible, they start expecting it from themselves. She returned to the hangar after debrief, stripped down her rig again, cleaned each piece by hand. Her body ached, ribs throbbing with every breath, but she refused to let the pain own her. Her life had never been about avoiding impact. It was about managing it. That evening, Captain Thorne called a closed-door meeting with the senior instructors. The mood was tense. Half the room avoided eye contact. The other half looked angry that this had happened under their roof. Thorne didn't waste time. "What happened yesterday isn't just a disciplinary failure," he said. "It's a cultural one, and it's on us." An older instructor shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, Jensen's actions don't represent the rest of us." Thorne's gaze hardened, "Doesn't he?" The man hesitated. Thorne stepped closer, his tone calm but merciless. "How many of you laughed, or stayed quiet when he mocked her on the plane?" No one answered. "That's complicity," he said softly. Every man who stood by and said nothing built the silence that nearly killed her. He paused, scanning the faces around the table. "This is the kind of silence that gets good people buried." The words hit like gunfire. No one moved. Finally, Thorne sat, exhaling slowly. "I won't bury another one, not here, not under my command." He looked up at the screen behind him. The photo of the dune, the faint trail carved into its slope by a body that refused to die. "That," he said quietly, "is what professionalism looks like. Not muscles, not medals, mastery." And for the first time they listened. Night again. The desert turned silver under a pale moon. Anna walked alone toward the dune. The air was cold, the sand cool beneath her boots. She stopped at the base of the slope, the same one that had nearly claimed her life. She stood there for a long time, staring up at the scar she'd carved into it. The trail looked almost elegant in the moonlight, a frozen signature of motion. For the first time since the fall, she allowed herself to feel something close to emotion. Not fear, not triumph. A strange, quiet sorrow. Because she understood something the others didn't. Every survival story has a cost. She walked away, yes, but the real damage wasn't to her body. It was to her belief that professionalism alone could protect her from prejudice. She built a life on merit, on mastery, on competence. But this time, competence hadn't stopped someone from trying to end her. It had only saved her after the fact. The realization was heavy, but necessary. She looked up at the stars, the same sky she'd fallen through, the same cold void she once learned to trust. And she whispered to herself, "You adapt, that's all you can do." Then she turned away from the dune and walked back toward the base lights in the distance. Each step left a print in the sand that the wind quickly began to erase. In the command office, Thorne sat alone reviewing reports. The formal NCIS file was already being compiled, timelines, evidence, testimonies. But what caught his attention wasn't the paperwork, it was the pattern. How easily people had underestimated her. How smoothly silence had enabled it. How close they'd come to losing one of the finest operators he'd ever seen. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Arrogance disguised as tradition," he murmured. "That's the disease." He thought back to the salute that morning, the collective hush that had fallen over the men when they realized who they were looking at. It wasn't just respect, it was revelation. He opened a blank document on his terminal and began typing. The words at the top of the page. Subject: Cultural Review Initiative, Project Sharma. He didn't know what it would become yet, only that it needed to exist. He typed for hours notes on leadership accountability, inclusion, operational integrity. He wrote about how prejudice corrodes readiness, how ego distorts discipline, how silence kills trust. And somewhere near the end, he wrote a single sentence that would later become a doctrine across the special warfare community. Competence is the only currency. He stared at it for a long time, the hum of the monitor filling the silence. Then he saved the file and closed the terminal. Outside his window, the dune gleamed faintly in the moonlight. He whispered, "You did more than survive, Master Chief. You changed something." At 200 hours, Anna stood in her quarters, packing her gear with her usual precision. She had already declined medical rest. She had no interest in debriefing dramatics. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Thorne. "Take the week off. Orders to follow, you've earned it." She read it twice, then shut off the device. Earning wasn't what this was about. She looked at the folded American flag on her wall, the one that had traveled with her through every deployment. She carried it through fire, rain, snow, and now sand. It was more than fabric, it was a promise. She reached out and touched the edge of it, whispering the quiet creed she lived by. "Do the work, let the noise die on its own." And as the desert wind howled faintly outside, Anna Sharma closed her duffel and sat on the edge of her bed. Not resting, just waiting. Because people like her didn't chase redemption. They built it. What happens when a miracle becomes a memo? When something that should have ended a life, instead, begins to rewrite the rules. The investigation moved fast, faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, the case was complete, the evidence airtight. Senior Chief Rick "Rhino" Jensen's file now sat under red classification stamped with every ugly truth that had surfaced. Sabotage of military equipment, attempted murder, conduct unbecoming of an officer. The words were sterile, procedural. But behind them was a single truth too heavy to put on paper. He'd underestimated a woman who didn't need permission to survive. Inside the base's legal annex, a small, windowless room that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach, the formal hearing began. It wasn't a trial, not yet. It was the military's version of confrontation. Captain Elias Thorne presided in silence, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved from stone. Around the table sat 3 other senior officers and 1 civilian legal advisor. Across from them, Jensen sat in the same seat he had occupied during countless training briefings. But now, his posture was different, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, hands clasped like he was trying to hold himself together. He avoided looking toward the far corner of the room where Master Chief Anna Sharma sat in quiet observation. Her presence was calm, surgical, no emotion, no satisfaction. She wasn't there as a victim. She was there as data. Thorne began. "Senior Chief Jensen, do you understand the charges?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have counsel?" "Yes, sir." "And do you have anything to say before this panel reviews the evidence?" Jensen swallowed. His throat bobbed like a trapped heartbeat. I made a mistake, sir. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I thought she could handle it. I thought it'd just prove a point." Thorne's eyes flicked to him cold. "What point was that?" "That," Jensen faltered, "that this isn't a place for people who don't belong." The silence that followed was suffocating. Thorne leaned forward, his voice calm, precise. "And who exactly decides who belongs, Senior Chief?" Jensen opened his mouth, but no words came. Thorne's tone hardened. "You had 20 years to learn that lesson and you still don't understand it. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed as tradition." He tapped a folder on the table, opening to the evidence photos, close-ups of the damaged rig, the bent pin, the residue from Jensen's gloves. The room filled with the soft click of the overhead projector as each image changed. "This," Thorne continued, "wasn't a mistake, it was intent." He looked up, meeting Jensen's eyes. "The only thing you didn't account for was that the person you tried to destroy was more professional than you'll ever be." The words hit like ordnance, quiet, devastating. Jensen dropped his gaze. The muscles in his jaw twitched once, then stilled. For the first time, the mask cracked. His shoulders began to shake. "I just wanted respect," he whispered. You spend long enough teaching people to be hard, you forget how to be decent. Thorne let the silence sit. Then he said quietly, "Respect isn't taken, Senior Chief. It's earned. And you've spent your career proving you don't know the difference." He gestured to the guards, "Take him." The Master-at-Arms moved forward, firm and silent. Jensen didn't resist, didn't look back. When the door closed behind him, Thorne turned to Sharma. "Master Chief, anything you'd like to add for the record?" She stood spine straight, hands behind her back. "No, Captain," she said softly. "The evidence speaks for itself." He nodded. "It does, but the lesson won't, not unless people like you stay to teach it." She hesitated just slightly, then said, "Then I'll stay." The following morning, the desert greeted her the way it always did, indifferent, endless, brutal in its honesty. At 5:30, she was back on the drop line, not as a student, not as an evaluator, but as an instructor. The trainees, still shaken by what they'd seen, lined up with the same nervous reverence one might offer a monument. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "Check your gear," she said. Her tone was calm, low, and absolute. Every man obeyed instantly. She walked the line, inspecting each rig. Her touch was light, precise. No wasted movement, no sound louder than the hiss of nylon under her gloves. When she reached a young candidate near the end, a wide-eyed petty officer barely 20, she paused. He froze. She saw it, the guilt. He'd been one of the ones who laughed on the plane. She didn't need an apology. She needed a correction. "You'll jump first today," she said. His eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice softened, but only slightly. "Remember this, candidate. Gravity doesn't care about your doubts. It cares about your discipline." He nodded, face pale, jaw trembling. And somewhere behind her, Captain Thorne watched from the control tower, a faint hint of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. He saw what she was doing, not just training bodies, but rebuilding a culture. One jump at a time. Over the next week, word of the incident spread beyond the base. It traveled in hushed tones, across secure channels and encrypted forums, through instructors, veterans, and active operators who had spent lifetimes perfecting the art of silence. The story mutated, as legends do. In one version, she landed without a single bruise. In another, she disarmed Jensen midair before hitting the ground. A few claimed she didn't fall at all, that she flew. The truth was quieter, harder, and infinitely more impressive. It wasn't luck, it was physics, precision, and composure. What spread faster than rumor, though, was the message behind it. Every operator, every trainee, every instructor who heard the story felt the same uneasy pulse of introspection. They began to ask themselves, who am I in that story? The gatekeeper or the professional? The noise or the work? And in that quiet questioning, change began. By the second week, the base looked different. Not physically, the same sand, same wind, same hangars. But the people were different. The instructors no longer shouted for dominance. They spoke for clarity. The trainees no longer measured strength in decibels. They measured it in consistency. Rhino Jensen's name, once synonymous with bravado, became something else entirely. "Don't pull a rhino." It became slang, a whispered warning for letting ego cloud judgment, for mistaking arrogance for authority. Even the dune where she landed became sacred ground. Someone, no one knew who, planted a small flag at its base. On it, 3 simple words, stenciled in black. "Competence is currency." And for the first time, those words meant something deeper than any slogan printed on a poster. One afternoon, Thorne found Sharma standing at the base of that same dune. The sun hung low, painting the sky in fire and gold. She was alone, arms crossed, eyes on the slope that had nearly ended her. He stopped beside her, silent for a while. "They're calling it the ghost drop," he said finally. Her lips twitched faintly, ghost drop. Yeah, guess that's what happens when a legend walks out of a crater. She shook her head. I'm not a legend, Captain, just a professional who did her job. That's what legends always say. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind carried sand over the tracks she'd made weeks ago, erasing the last visible trace of her fall. Thorne watched it vanish. You know, he said quietly, I've served long enough to see a lot of noise pass through this uniform. Men shouting about standards they never met. But you did something different. You reminded us what those words are supposed to mean. She looked at him then, her gaze calm and steady. I didn't do it for meaning. I did it because that's what's required. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's why it matters. Weeks passed. The investigation closed. Jensen's fate was sealed, dishonorable discharge, federal confinement. The story of his downfall became mandatory reading in ethics modules. But what remained wasn't his disgrace. It was her example. She continued to train, instruct, correct, never lectured, never preached. She simply demonstrated. And every night, when the desert quieted and the stars burned over the horizon, there was always someone on the training field, a candidate practicing his landings in silence, trying to match the precision of the woman who'd redefined what impossible meant. She never joined them, never interrupted. She just watched from the shadows, ensuring they learned the lesson the right way, through repetition, through humility, through work. Because that's what mastery was. Doing it right when no one's watching. By the end of the month, a new kind of respect had settled across the base, not the loud kind that demanded recognition. The quiet kind that came from observation. People stopped underestimating what they couldn't understand. And for the first time in years, Captain Thorne felt something that had been missing from his command, faith. Not in slogans or reputations, but in the quiet professionals who embodied the standard without ever having to announce it. He wrote one final note in the Project Sharma file that night. If arrogance is noise, then integrity is silence, and sometimes silence wins. He closed the report and leaned back, letting the hum of the bass lull the edges of his thoughts. Out on the dunes, the wind whispered through the night, carrying fragments of stories that would one day become legend. And somewhere beyond the sound of generators and the low hum of training drills, a single voice echoed faintly in memory, not loud, but steady, certain. Focus on your training, the rest is just noise. Because that was her real message, hidden beneath the headlines, the whispers, the awe. Not that a woman survived what should have killed her, but that she refused to let failure or arrogance define her world. Her survival wasn't defiance, it was instruction. And as dawn broke over the California desert once more, casting long shadows over the silent slope of the Ghost Drop, one thing became clear. Legends aren't written in words. They're carved in the ground where someone refused to stay down. How does a legend travel when no one dares to say her name out loud? Not through official memos, not through speeches. Through whispers, through the quiet awe passed from one professional to another in the dark corners of the world. It began like all myths do, small, uncertain, half-believed. A trainee told a new instructor about the woman who fell without a chute and lived. That instructor told a teammate deployed overseas. And that teammate, somewhere between two firefights and a long silence, passed it to another. Within weeks, the story had gone global, not through press or rumor, but through encrypted channels, private calls, and late-night conversations between people who understood what it meant. Because to them, it wasn't about gender, it wasn't even about survival. It was about standards, about what it really meant to be a professional when no one is watching, and the world seems intent on your failure. And while the legend grew, Anna Sharma remained exactly where she had always been, in the background, working, teaching, quietly turning a fractured command into a functioning one. On the surface, nothing about her life looked different. She still woke before dawn, drank her coffee black, reviewed flight manifests, and inspected every piece of training equipment herself. But the energy around her had shifted. When she walked through the corridors of the command facility, conversations paused, not out of fear but respect. When she stepped into a classroom, even the senior instructors stood a little straighter. And when she spoke briefly, efficiently, without flourish, everyone listened. It wasn't authority by rank, it was authority by example. Captain Thorne saw it too. He'd begun noticing the subtle changes, how the laughter in locker rooms had quieted, how the tone of banter had lost its edge, how the candidates now talked about precision instead of power. One evening, during a staff briefing, he set his coffee aside and looked across the table. "This place feels different," he said. An instructor nodded. "Yes, sir, feels cleaner, quieter." Thorne smiled faintly. "That's not an accident. It's culture doing what punishment never could." He closed his folder and stood. "Let's keep it that way." A week later, a courier from Naval Special Warfare Command arrived with sealed documents. The envelope was thick, stamped with multiple clearance levels. Inside, a transfer order. Captain Thorne read it twice before walking to the training hangar, where Anna was adjusting the straps on a parachute harness for a candidate half her age. She noticed him instantly, her instincts too sharp to miss the tension in his gait. Without looking up, she said, "You have orders." He handed the envelope to her. She didn't open it right away. She waited until the trainee had moved on, then broke the seal with quiet precision. Her eyes scanned the document, a single paragraph that spoke volumes. "Master Chief Petty Officer Anna Sharma is hereby reassigned to Special Projects Division, Naval Special Warfare Command, effective immediately." No explanation, no destination. Just an address, NSWC, Virginia Beach. She folded the paper neatly. "Special Projects." Thorne nodded slowly. "That's what they call everything that doesn't officially exist." He studied her face for a moment. "You knew this was coming." "I knew they'd find out," she said. "They always do." He hesitated. "Do you want to go?" Her expression didn't change. "It's not about want, Captain. It's about need. They need people who can clean up messes without making new ones." Thorne's jaw tightened. "And what about this place, what you've built here?" She looked around, the trainees on the field, the instructors running drills, the faint glint of the brass plaque at the base of the dune. "It'll hold," she said, "if they remember the lesson." Thorne nodded slowly. "They will." He offered his hand. She shook it firmly, without ceremony. "Fair winds, Master Chief." She gave a faint smile. "No such thing, Captain, only strong ones." Then she turned back to her work. That night, under the floodlights of the hangar, she packed her gear, each item folded with the kind of precision that came from ritual. There was no farewell gathering, no speeches. She wouldn't have wanted one. A few of the trainees lingered near the exit, pretending to organize equipment, stealing glances as she zipped her duffel. Finally, one of them, the same young man who had jumped first on her command weeks ago, stepped forward, clutching something wrapped in brown paper. "Ma'am." She looked up. "Yes, candidate." He swallowed hard. We made this for you." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small brass plaque mounted on wood. Engraved were 5 words. "Digi Ghost, competence is currency." She stared at it for a long time, then looked up at the faces around her, young, nervous, changed. "Who paid for this?" The trainee shrugged. "All of us, we figured it mattered." She nodded once. "It does." No speeches, no smiles, just that. And somehow, it was more powerful than any ceremony. The next morning, the base was awake long before sunrise. A convoy idled near the hangar. Anna stood at the edge of the tarmac, duffel over her shoulder, the desert wind whipping through her hair. Captain Thorne joined her. "Your flight leaves in 10. She gave a small nod. He looked out toward the horizon. "You'll vanish again, won't you?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the rising light. "That's the job." He turned to her. "Then before you do, tell me one thing." She glanced at him. "When you were falling before you hit the dune, what were you thinking?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she said, "I was thinking about training." He frowned. "Training?" She nodded. "Gravity's constant, wind's a variable. The only thing you control is your reaction to both." Thorne exhaled softly. "That's elegant." "It's survival," she corrected. And with that, she turned and walked toward the waiting aircraft. The engine spooled up, echoing through the desert. As she climbed aboard, the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, streaks of gold against blue. By the time the sun fully rose, the plane was a small dot against the sky, fading into the light. And just like that, she was gone. But the impact of her presence, that stayed. The ghost drop became more than an event. It became doctrine. Within months, Captain Thorne, Project Sharma, had been formally adopted across all naval special warfare training centers. Its first directive was brutally simple: judge by performance, not perception. The second, ego has no operational value. The third, written in Thorne's own handwriting: in silence, standards rise. The effect was immediate. Instructors began re-evaluating how they tested and mentored candidates. Candidates began holding themselves to quieter, stricter expectations. And for the first time in years, the phrase "quiet professional" actually meant something again. What Anna Sharma had done wasn't just survive sabotage. She had recalibrated an institution. Months later, Thorne retired. On his final day, he visited the dune one last time. The brass plaque the trainees had made for her was still there, polished, gleaming in the sunlight. Someone had added another line beneath the original engraving: "Gravity tests everyone." He smiled. "You'd like that, Master Chief," he murmured. He stood for a while, letting the wind coat his boots in fine sand. Then he turned to leave. Behind him, the desert stretched endlessly, the same landscape where arrogance had once tried to destroy humility and lost. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a classified facility whose coordinates weren't listed on any map, a woman in a plain gray shirt adjusted the straps on a prototype flight rig. Her new team watched her in silence: scientists, engineers, pilots, each aware, at least in rumor, of who she was. She didn't introduce herself, didn't explain her past. She didn't need to. Her movements spoke for her. Precise, controlled. The lead engineer approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you sure about testing this personally? The altitude risk profile." She looked up. "If I don't trust it, no one else should." He hesitated. "Understood." She stepped toward the aircraft, a new kind of insertion platform designed for near-space halo missions. As she secured her helmet, the engineer caught a glimpse of a small engraving on her wrist strap, barely visible, etched by hand. Déjà. The engines ignited, the platform lifted into the night. And once again, Anna Sharma disappeared into the sky, the quiet professional who had already proven that falling wasn't failure. It was just another form of flight. The legend continued to grow. At training bases across the world, instructors told new candidates the story of the ghost drop, not as a cautionary tale, but as a moral compass. It was never about gender. It was about gravity. And the truth that some people meet it differently. She became a symbol, not of defiance but of discipline. Not of rebellion but of refinement. And those who understood the story didn't speak her name in reverence. They spoke it as a reminder. a reminder that real strength never shouts. It just lands and stands back up. What happens when a single act of professionalism starts rewriting doctrine across oceans? It begins quietly, it always does. No grand announcements, no news coverage. Just a ripple. At first, it was a training update. A few lines buried in an internal memo circulated between commands. Operational integrity to include psychological discipline review based on Sharma case study, Oct 18. Then, within a month, that memo turned into a field manual amendment. By the next quarter, it was policy. By the next year, it was culture. They called it the Sharma Protocol. And though no one said her name out loud in the meetings, every operator knew what it meant. It meant the end of ego disguised as leadership. It meant the end of testing people to failure for sport. It meant the beginning of a quiet renaissance in how the world's most dangerous professionals measured worth. But by the time her name had become policy, Anna Sharma was already gone. Far from the California desert, a transport jet sliced through a storm above the Pacific. Inside, Anna sat alone, her duffel secured under the seat, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. The engines roared against the wind, but she was calm, her breathing slow, deliberate. The transfer order she'd received weeks ago had brought her here, to a project that didn't officially exist, one buried under so many layers of classification that even she had needed to be briefed twice before understanding its purpose. It wasn't combat. Not directly. It was prevention. A specialized unit tasked with infiltration of compromised defense networks, identifying corruption, sabotage, and security failures within special operations itself. In other words, she was hunting the disease that had almost killed her. When the jet landed at an unmarked runway outside Virginia Beach, she was met by a man in civilian clothes, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades hiding authority behind understatement. "Welcome to Ghost Division," he said. She gave a small nod. "How long has this existed?" He smiled faintly. "Officially, about 5 minutes before you got here." She followed him into the compound, a facility that looked like a warehouse from the outside, but inside glowed with quiet technology and precision. Walls lined with secure servers, holographic map tables, racks of parachute rigs, comms suits, exoskeleton testing gear. He led her into a briefing room. On the wall, a digital display blinked with her personnel file. Most of it was redacted. He handed her a folder, actual paper, not digital. "Your next assignment," he said, "a compromised training cell in the Mediterranean theater. Someone been selling equipment schematics to a foreign contractor. We've already lost 3 prototypes. We need to know how deep it goes." She flipped through the pages. Undercover. Advisory cover. You're not there to expose anyone publicly. You're there to watch, verify, and extract evidence. Quietly. Her eyes lifted from the folder. "What about extraction parameters?" "You won't need them," he said. "We don't fail in this division." A pause, his tone softened. "You're not here because of your name, Master Chief. You're here because of your standard." She nodded once, understood. He watched her for a long moment before saying, "You're not curious how we knew about you." She gave the faintest smile. "I assumed someone was watching." He returned the smile. Everyone was. 2 weeks later, she was in Malta. The air smelled of salt and machinery, the harbor lit with the gold of late afternoon. The facility she'd been assigned to audit was an international training site shared by multiple allied nations, a place where differences in doctrine collided beneath a banner of cooperation. Her cover story was simple: a visiting Halo instructor from the U.S. Navy conducting procedural reviews. She moved through the base quietly, her presence drawing curious glances. Some recognized her name, others didn't, but all of them felt the stillness she carried, the gravity of competence that made noise unnecessary. She didn't issue orders, she asked questions. She didn't criticize, she observed. And within 48 hours, she found what she needed: inconsistencies in gear logs, duplicate parts shipments, maintenance records that didn't align. Someone had been replacing original equipment with inferior replicas and pocketing the surplus. It wasn't just theft, it was sabotage by greed. Her report would be enough to end multiple careers, but that wasn't her concern. Her job wasn't punishment, it was purification. Still, as she watched young operators train on gear they didn't know was faulty, something in her chest tightened. It wasn't anger, it was memory. Memory of what it felt like to trust a rig that had been compromised by someone else's arrogance. And she realized this was the same fight, just in a different form. That night she sat alone on the rooftop of the barracks, overlooking the sea. The horizon stretched endlessly, black water blending with black sky. The wind tugged at her hair, and the faint sound of drills echoed from the training field below. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. So many people thought the hardest part of service was combat. They were wrong. The hardest part was staying pure when the system around you was. She'd seen men die for their ego, and others live quietly by their code. And she had chosen which kind she'd be long ago. Her comm unit buzzed, a secure message from Ghost Division headquarters. Transmission confirmed. Continue monitoring. No engagement without command authorization. She typed a single reply, copy. Then she sat back, looking out over the harbor. Sometimes, she thought, the fight for integrity was lonelier than any battlefield. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the ripples she had left continued to widen. Captain Elias Thorne, now officially retired, had been invited to lecture at the Naval Special Warfare Academy. He stood before a room full of fresh-faced candidates, the next generation of special operators, wide-eyed and hungry. He didn't bring slides, didn't show footage. He brought a story. He told them about the day a parachute failed and a woman turned physics into survival. He told them about arrogance dressed as leadership and silence mistaken for professionalism. He told them about what he'd learned when he saluted her in front of his entire command, that humility isn't weakness, it's discipline perfected. When he finished, the room was silent, no one moved. Finally, one of the cadets raised a hand. "Sir, what happened to her?" Thorne smiled faintly. "She's still serving." Another cadet asked, "Where?" He looked out the window toward the sun sinking beyond the bay. "Wherever she's needed." He paused, then said, "The truth is, you'll never know where people like her are. That's the point. But if you ever find yourself in a moment where everything's failing and you keep your head anyway, she's there. In the Standard." The room remained silent for a long time. And that silence, Thorne thought, was the greatest applause of all. Months passed. The Sharma Protocol spread beyond the Navy. The Air Force adopted its training philosophy for special reconnaissance teams. The Army's Delta training cells quietly began integrating its principles into their evaluations. And even among allied nations, the British SAS, Australian Commandos, French GIGN, the story circulated. Each version slightly different, but all anchored by the same core. A fall that became a flight. A failure that became reform. It became less about gender and more about gravity, the gravity of responsibility. Anna Sharma had turned survival into systemic evolution. In Malta, her mission came to an abrupt pivot. One evening, as she returned from the hangar, she noticed the lights inside the maintenance shed still on. The others had long gone to mess. She paused, instinct sharpening. A shadow moved inside, quick, deliberate. She approached silently, slipping through the door, staying in the dark. Inside, a man stood over a crate, transferring components into an unmarked case. "Turn around," she said softly. He froze. Slowly he turned, a technician she'd seen earlier in the week. Nervous, forgettable. "Until now." "Who are you selling to?" she asked. He hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't understand." Her tone stayed even. "Then explain it to me." He glanced at the door. "They'll kill me if I talk." She stepped closer. "They'll kill you if you don't." He looked into her eyes, saw no fear, no anger, just inevitability. And he broke. Minutes later, she had the truth, a contracting network posing as supply logistics, siphoning tech to private buyers. She transmitted the data through her secure channel, her voice calm as she coded the message. "Ghost Division, this is Sharma. Confirmation package recovered. Mission complete." There was a pause, then a voice replied. "Copy Ghost, extraction window confirmed. Welcome back." She closed the channel and turned to the technician, who sat trembling against the crate. "What happens to me now?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "Learn," she said simply, "or this fall kills you next time." Then she walked out, her boots echoing softly against the concrete, her silhouette swallowed by the Mediterranean night. The next morning, the base woke to the sound of helicopters. Naval security teams descended, sealing off the compound. The investigation swept through like fire through dry grass. By midday, half a dozen personnel were detained, contracts revoked, and an entire black market pipeline dismantled before it could spread. But no one saw her leave. By the time the dust settled, Anna Sharma was already on another plane, another mission, another silence. Back in Virginia, the commanding director of Ghost Division reviewed her file and smiled. One of his aides asked, "Sir, how does she keep doing it? Never asks for credit, never slows down." The director leaned back. "Because people like her don't serve for recognition. They serve because someone has to hold the line when the rest of us look away." He tapped the screen where her call sign glowed in white text. "Diziachai Ghost." "She's not the kind of storm you see coming," he said quietly. "She's the kind that leaves the air cleaner after it's passed." And out there, somewhere over another unmarked horizon, she sat once more in the belly of a transport plane, wind screaming against the fuselage, red light flashing above the ramp. Her hand rested on the ripcord of a new parachute rig, one she had inspected herself twice, then once more for good measure. The jump master leaned close. "You ready, Chief?" She nodded once, "Always." The green light came on. And Anna Sharma, the ghost who once fell without a chute, stepped into the sky again. Because falling, she knew, was never failure. It was the universe's way of checking whether you still trusted your own hands. What happens when silence starts to echo back? When the strength that carried you becomes the same thing that isolates you. Anna Sharma didn't talk much on missions. She didn't need to. But this one required more than precision. It required presence. Her next assignment came coded under Operation Halcyon. Objective: extraction of a civilian engineer held by a rogue faction in the Hindu Kush region. It wasn't an armed raid. It was supposed to be a surgical infiltration, quick and quiet. But there was something about the file that unsettled her. The target, Dr. Eshan Varma, had once worked for Naval Advanced Systems. And more importantly, he had once worked with her father. That name, that connection, it cracked the armor she'd spent years perfecting. She sat alone in the pre-mission briefing room, the hum of servers filling the silence. The lights were dim, and the mission map glowed in faint red. She studied the terrain, sharp ridges, narrow valleys, elevation markers that looked like scars across a topographic body. "Your insertion point is here," said the mission handler through the holographic interface. 2 clicks from the extraction site. No direct comms. Satellite blackout in that region. You'll have to go silent. She nodded slowly. "How long do I have?" 36 hours maximum. And confirmation on the hostage's condition. Unverified, last contact was 12 days ago. She absorbed that, the handler's voice softened. Sharma, this one's personal, isn't it? She didn't answer. She just looked at the glowing map and said, I'll get him. The night before the jump, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. The whir of ventilation mixed with distant thunder, a storm rolling in over the mountains she'd soon be landing in. She wasn't thinking about danger. She was thinking about her father, a man who had believed in systems, in the kind of institutional honor that time had since eroded. He died when she was 19, training accident they called it. But over the years, she'd learned the truth, equipment failure. The same story that had almost written her own ending. She wondered what he would think now, knowing his daughter had spent her career fixing the same cracks that killed him. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. There was no room for them in this life. She turned on her side, closed her eyes, and whispered a small promise into the darkness. I'll bring him home. The next evening, the storm had grown violent. Wind buffeted the transport plane, lightning flashing through thick clouds. Her team consisted of 2 ghost operatives, 1 local tracker and her. But once again, she was the one who would jump first. Visibility down to 30 meters, the jump master warned. You sure you want to go in this? She adjusted her helmet strap. I've jumped through worse. He shook his head with a grin that wasn't really a grin. You really have no fear, do you? Her reply was soft. I just don't let it drive. The green light blinked on. She stepped out into chaos. Wind tore at her body like claws, rain slamming her faceplate, lightning illuminating the mountains below. For a moment, she was weightless, not falling, not flying, suspended between choice and consequence. Then gravity reclaimed her. Her altimeter beeped once. She pulled at exactly the right second, the chute deployed clean, catching the air like a whisper. She rode the turbulence down, landing hard but controlled on a rocky slope. The others followed, their chutes ghostly in the dark. She touched down, unclipped, scanned the horizon. No signal, no sound, just the storm. Stay tight, she whispered. The team moved out. Hours passed. The terrain was brutal, steep inclines, jagged ridges, mud that pulled at their boots like quicksand. Every step was a negotiation between exhaustion and instinct. By dawn, they had eyes on the target compound, an abandoned mining facility repurposed as a hideout. Through the scope of her monocular, she counted 5 guards, 1 truck, and a perimeter fence rigged with motion sensors. 2 exposed for a frontal, said one operative beside her. She nodded, we go under. They found a drainage tunnel that ran beneath the fence, narrow, half-collapsed, but passable. One by one, they crawled through the wet earth, emerging inside the compound near the storage silos. The silence was suffocating. She signed to the team, split, sweep, confirm presence, no noise. They moved like phantoms. Minutes later, she reached the main building. The door was half open. Inside, the air smelled of oil and decay. She moved through the hallways, 1 step, 1 breath, 1 heartbeat at a time. And then she heard it, a voice, weak, trembling. Who's there? She froze. Dr. Varma, she whispered. A figure stirred in the corner of a dim cell, his face gaunt, beard unkempt, eyes hollow but alive. He looked up at her, Anna. Her throat tightened. How do you know my name? He gave a small, exhausted smile. Your father used to talk about you, said you had his stubbornness. Something broke in her chest, a soundless fracture of memory and pride. I'm here to get you out, she said. But before she could reach him, the compound erupted with noise. Gunfire, shouts, the thud of boots. Her earpiece crackled. We're blown, repeat, compromised. 2 hostiles down, more inbound. She cursed softly under her breath. The guards had tripped on the drainage tunnel, her entry point. She turned to Varma. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly. "Good, stay behind me." She moved fast, calm, deliberate, controlled. The sound of gunfire drew closer. They reached the back exit, only to find it blocked. A truck had crashed during the skirmish, debris filling the corridor. Her options collapsed. Then she saw it, an old elevator shaft, cables still intact. It wasn't escape, but it was distance. She attached her harness to the cable, clipped Varma in with a secondary line. "Hold on," she said. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Down." She cut the brake line and they descended fast, too fast. The cable screamed as friction burned through the gloves. Halfway down, the shaft shook with an explosion above. The shockwave knocked her grip loose. They fell the last 20 feet, crashing into a lower maintenance bay. Pain exploded in her shoulder, a white-hot burst, but she pushed through it, rolling onto her knees. Varma groaned beside her, dazed but alive. She checked him quickly. No fractures, no blood loss. Then she checked herself. Dislocated shoulder, minor concussion, nothing she hadn't lived through before. She adjusted the joint with a single sharp motion and hissed through her teeth. Then she looked up at the shaft above. The echo of footsteps, voices. They were coming. She turned to Varma. "Move." They ran through the tunnels, emerging into the open air as the first sunlight hit the peaks. Smoke rose from the compound behind them, their extraction window closing by the minute. She activated her beacon, but the storm interference was still heavy. The signal flickered. "Come on," she whispered to the sky. "Not now." For a moment, nothing. Then a faint tone, "Lock." She looked at Varma. "Helicopter in 3 minutes, can you hold?" He nodded. They reached the ridge as rotor blades appeared on the horizon, slicing through the morning haze. But before they could reach the LZ, a sniper round hit the rock near her head. She shoved Varma down. "Stay low." Another shot, closer. She scanned the ridge, caught a glint of glass. Instinct took over. She raised her rifle, adjusted for wind, elevation, breath. One squeeze. The glint disappeared. The sound of the shot echoed across the mountains, fading into silence. She exhaled slowly. When the chopper landed, she half-carried Varma aboard. The crew pulled them in, doors slamming shut as they lifted off. She sat on the floor, soaked, bruised, exhausted. Varma looked at her, eyes glassy. "Your father would have been proud," he said softly. She stared out the open ramp, watching the compound shrink below. Her voice barely audible. "He would have told me to keep training." That night at the field hospital, she lay in recovery, her shoulder strapped, head bandaged. Outside, medics moved in quiet efficiency. A Ghost Division officer entered, standing at her bedside. "Mission complete," he said. "The intel you recovered confirms an internal network. We'll handle the rest." She nodded slowly. He hesitated, then added, "You saved a man who built half of what we use to survive out there. You did more than your duty." Her eyes stayed on the wall. "Duty's the easy part." He frowned. "What's the hard part?" She turned her head toward him, her voice a whisper. "Coming back." He said nothing. When he left, she stared at the ceiling for a long time, the rhythmic beep of the monitor like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She survived again. But survival, she realized, had its own kind of fatigue. Every fall she endured left something behind, not a wound, but a silence that grew heavier each time she stood up. And maybe that was the real price of resilience, carrying all the moments you didn't break. Outside, the wind shifted. The desert stars returned, the night clean and endless. Somewhere in the distance, another team trained for their own impossible jump, never knowing the woman who had rewritten the rules was lying awake miles away, wondering what her next fall would cost. She didn't pray. She didn't dream. She just breathed slow, steady, silent. Because sometimes that's all survival really is. She never liked goodbyes. They always felt too loud. Even in the years that followed the Hindu Kush operation, Anna Sharma kept her distance from farewells. She would finish an assignment, hand in the report, and vanish before the room even realized she'd left. It wasn't rudeness. It was rhythm. The rhythm of someone who knew that closure was for the living, and she had long since become something else. Ghost Division changed shape around her. What began as a covert task force became a philosophy, a kind of moral architecture built on the bones of secrecy and service. The people who served under its crest didn't measure success in medals or mentions. They measured it in the moments where chaos came, and they stayed steady. And quietly, across units and commands, something beautiful happened. Integrity started to feel contagious. You couldn't see it in reports. You couldn't track it in data. But it was there, in the way young instructors spoke to their recruits, in the way arguments about standards turned into conversations about excellence. Somewhere in those quiet ripples, Anna found herself back at Edward's base. It was years since she'd last set foot there. The desert hadn't changed, still the same dry breath of wind, the same sun carving gold across the dunes, but the people were different. The moment she stepped onto the tarmac, she noticed it, the silence. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the respectful kind that fills space when people recognize what's standing in front of them. Captain Elias Thorne had long since retired to a cabin near the Sierras, but his philosophy had stayed. His name was spoken like a compass, a direction, not a memory. The base commander who greeted her now was a woman in her 30s. Firm handshake, clear eyes, posture that said earned, not given. "Ma'am," she said, "it's an honor." Anna smiled faintly. "It's just a base, nothing mystical about sand and steel." The commander smiled back. "That's what you said 20 years ago. They still quote it." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Do they?" "Yes, ma'am, right before they jump." They walked along the training fields together. The sound of distant engines carried on the wind. Young candidates moved through drills with precision, no shouting, no posturing, just quiet repetition. The commander said softly, "We renamed the main training program 2 years ago. It's called the Sharma Standard now." Anna stopped walking. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Because names fade, standards don't." The commander smiled gently. "With respect, ma'am, sometimes a name helps remind people why the standard matters." Anna didn't answer. She just looked out toward the jump zone where a trainee was checking her rig. Her movements, methodical, steady, deliberate, reminded Anna of herself, years ago. The commander followed her gaze. "That's officer candidate Rhea Lynn, top of her class, comes from a family of civilians. No military background, no sponsorship, just walked in and earned it." Anna watched the young woman finish her checks, then close her eyes for a moment, breathing, centering, preparing. The plane's engine started. Dust swirled across the field. "Is she ready?" Anna asked. The commander smiled. "She doesn't think so, which probably means she is." They watched as the aircraft lifted into the sky. The sound faded into the distance, leaving only the desert wind. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, the trainees gathered for the post-drop debrief. Anna stayed at the edge of the crowd, blending into the shadows near the hangar. She didn't need to be seen. She only needed to see. One by one, the candidates filed in, tired but alive, faces flushed with the kind of exhaustion that carries pride hidden beneath it. Then came Rhea. She limped slightly, a small misstep on landing, nothing serious, but her eyes burned bright. The instructor clapped her shoulder. "You good?" "Yes, sir." "Anything you'd change about your jump?" She thought for a moment. "The fear," she said. "I'd change that." The instructor smiled. "That's what the training's for." Anna felt something shift inside her chest, not nostalgia, but recognition. The same pulse she'd felt the first time she stood under a red light, waiting for the green. The same fear, the same clarity, the same choice. When the crowd began to disperse, Anna turned to leave, but a voice stopped her. "Ma'am." She turned. Ria Lynn stood there, hesitant but steady. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt," Ria said quickly. "I just wanted to say I've read about you. I mean, we all have. The ghost dropped the protocols, the—" Anna smiled softly. "You shouldn't believe everything you read." Ria laughed nervously. "Maybe not, but the part that stuck with me was something you said in an old debrief transcript. That discipline is the language of belief. I didn't understand it at first. I think I do now." Anna tilted her head. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am. It's not about being fearless. It's about being consistent even when you're terrified." Anna's lips curved slightly. "That's closer." She studied the young woman for a long moment. "You know what people get wrong about fear?" Ria shook her head. "It's not the opposite of strength," Anna said. "It's proof that something still matters to you. If you weren't afraid to lose it, it wouldn't be worth doing." Ria absorbed the words, nodding slowly. Anna took a step closer. "The next time you jump, remember this: gravity doesn't test your courage, it tests your honesty." Ria blinked, unsure what she meant, but she would remember the words for the rest of her life. Anna gave a small nod, then turned away, the conversation ending like a whisper. That night, Anna sat alone in the observation tower, overlooking the training field. The sky was vast, endless, a sprawl of stars that seemed both close and unreachable. She thought about the years, the missions, the losses, the silences she'd carried. Each one a weight, each one a reminder. There were times she'd wondered whether the work was worth it, whether the effort to preserve something pure inside a machine that never stopped grinding was an act of faith or futility. But watching the young recruits on the field below, their quiet focus, their refusal to cut corners, she realized something she hadn't before. It wasn't about perfection. It never had been. It was about inheritance. Not the kind you write into documents, but the kind you carve into time through the choices you make when no one's watching. Legacy wasn't what you left behind. It was who stood taller because you did. A week later, the command hosted its annual training symposium. Representatives from across the Allied forces gathered to discuss advancements, share strategies, trade philosophies. Anna attended as a guest, though most didn't recognize her. The name on her badge was generic: A. Singh, Consultant, Ghost Division. She preferred it that way. During a panel on ethical training practices, a young instructor from the British SAS stood and asked a question. How do we balance pressure with precision? How do we push without breaking? The room quieted. The moderator hesitated, scanning the audience for someone qualified to answer. Then softly from the back, Anna spoke. "You don't balance them," she said. "You integrate them." Heads turned. She stood, her voice calm, carrying just enough weight to fill the silence. "Pressure isn't the enemy," she continued. "It's information. It tells you where the cracks are in equipment, in systems, in people. Precision isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the discipline to respond to them without panic." The room was completely still. "Every soldier you train," she said, "deserves two things: the truth about what will test them and the trust that they can survive it. Take away either one and you're not training. You're gambling." When she sat down, no one applauded. They just nodded quietly, respectfully, the kind of silence that says, "We heard you." Later, as the crowd dispersed, one of the senior instructors approached her. "You're Anna Sharma, aren't you?" She smiled faintly, not officially. He extended his hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, officially doesn't matter." She shook it, a rare warmth softening her eyes. Years passed. The world changed again, new technologies, new threats, New wars fought in silence and code instead of steel and fire. But one thing stayed the same. Wherever elite training happened, the ghost drop was still told. Not as a story of heroism, but as a reminder of precision, integrity, and quiet endurance. Every version of it was different. Some exaggerated, some simplified. But the moral was always the same. Gravity is fair, ego is not. And somewhere in those retellings, Anna Sharma became less a person and more a principle. Her name turned into shorthand across generations. Instructors would simply say, "Run it Sharma tight," and everyone knew what that meant. One spring morning, long after her official records ended, the Naval Academy in Annapolis unveiled a new facility, a Joint Service Leadership Institute. At the entrance stood a plaque. It didn't show rank or even mention gender. It simply read, "Dedicated to those who lead quietly." Below it a quote, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." No signature. But everyone knew. That same day, across the country at Edwards Base, a new class of candidates stood at the edge of the jump zone. Among them was Rhea Lynn, now an instructor. She adjusted her rig, checking every strap, every buckle, every pin. Her trainees watched her with the same awe she once had for Anna Sharma. One of them asked nervously, "Ma'am, what if something goes wrong up there?" Rhea smiled softly. "Something always does, that's why we train." She stepped toward the open ramp, the desert wind filling the aircraft. "Remember," she said over the roar of the engines, "fear isn't your enemy. Forgetting your training is." The red light turned green. She jumped, and as she fell through the sky, weightless, calm, unafraid, she thought of a woman she had met years ago on this same ground. The legend who never needed a parachute to land. Far below, in the tower overlooking the field, the base commander stood beside a visitor in plain clothes. The visitor was older now, hair streaked with gray, face lined with time, but her eyes, calm and unwavering, hadn't changed. The commander glanced at her, "Still watching, ma'am." Anna smiled faintly, "Always." The commander hesitated. "Do you ever miss it, the missions, the noise?" Anna looked out across the desert, the horizon stretching endlessly. "Sometimes," she said, "but not enough to go back. The point was never to stay in the fight. It was to make sure others didn't forget why they're in it." The commander nodded, then looked at her curiously. "What will you do now?" Anna took a slow breath, the kind that sounded like peace. "Maybe rest, maybe teach, maybe disappear again." The commander smiled. "You know they'll keep talking about you, right? Probably forever." Anna turned toward the window, sunlight catching the faint scar along her temple, the only visible souvenir of a life lived in quiet storms. "Then let them," she said, "but I hope they remember the lesson, not the legend." Outside, the jumpers touched down in perfect formation, steady, safe, alive. Anna watched in silence, then whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." At dusk, when the base emptied and the last helicopter faded into the orange horizon, Anna walked alone toward the dune. The same dune where she'd once fallen. The same ground that had tested her, defined her, and in a way saved her. She reached the small brass plaque at its base. The words were weathered but still legible. "Competence is currency." She knelt, brushed the sand off the surface, and smiled. "You did well," she murmured to the wind. For a moment she closed her eyes, not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as a human being finally at rest with the weight she'd carried. The wind answered in its own way, soft, endless, unbroken. She stood, turned back toward the compound, and began walking. Each step slow, deliberate, grounded. Somewhere far above, a new plane climbed into the sky, its engines roaring like the pulse of a generation that had learned to fall the right way. Anna looked up, shading her eyes, and for a moment the sun caught her face in a halo of light. Then she smiled, small, almost private, and whispered to no one in particular, "Keep training." And with that, she disappeared into the golden horizon. Not as a myth, not as a hero, but as the quiet standard that refused to die. Because in the end, the real legacy of a warrior isn't found in noise or glory. It's found in the silence that keeps others steady long after you're gone. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.